Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We're so happy to have our guest. We've got Aubrey Wallace, who is an artist and does the programming for the Laramie Plains Civic Center. We've also got Ishmael Dominguez, who is part of the Laramie Art Cooperative, an artist, and also does programming for the Wyoming Arts Council. Their topic today is a very interesting topic, I think, for all of us, for me especially, because it has to deal with art hierarchies. And having worked in arts nonprofits for my whole career, I think that I've seen those hierarchies change and shift from when I started 25 years ago to where I am now. And I really think that the more cooperative approach was perhaps spurred to some extent by COVID and by dwindling resources for the arts. But we're happy to explore the traditional place where funders are viewed as major institutions at the top and individual creators are at the bottom, reinforcing the idea that money is what drives the arts independently of community. And in this webinar, we're going to be discussing how to collapse those rigid structures, how to build a symbiotic model that fosters more collaboration, mutual care, and shared resilience across Wyoming for the arts. So the arts ecosystem booklet that Aubrey and Ishmael put together should be linked in the chat. And it's available as a great support for artists, creators, administrators, and the organizations to understand new ways of looking at their roles, new ways of acquiring resources, and shared responsibilities. So with that, I think we're going to kick off. And Aubrey and Ishmael, can you just briefly break down what an arts ecosystem is and touch on why this framework is so vital for our creative communities in Wyoming?
Yeah. Well, so an ecosystem in the everywhere, it's a community of living organisms that are interacting with one another and their environment. They're exchanging energy, resources, and support in a way that sustains life and balance. So just like a forest or a coral reef or your backyard, all of those are made up of living organisms, and we are also living organisms that are interacting with our own resources.
And I think part of this is when we really see an ecosystem thriving, its resources are circulating so that everyone and every organism in there can benefit. So they're not just pooling in one area and kind of becoming stagnant, but rather they're circulating around the room. You know, if we're thinking of a garden, it's circulating between each different plant or thing that's growing there. And if we're looking kind of at this topic for today, it's products or resources or grants, things that are moving between administrators and organizations and artists and venues and performers. So being able to kind of keep that moving um, is pretty beneficial, and it has its own unique energy and strength and responsibilities that help contribute to the community's overall well-being. So different strengths can help other things that might not be as strong. So leaning on those connections and really helping with that.
So I think that that's a pretty good definition of what an ecosystem is, where all the living organisms interact with each other rather than siloing to create a beneficial product. So in the traditional relationship models, we often see a more rigid hierarchy where the funder again is at the very top, and then that's followed by the museums and the galleries, and then the artist, the creator, is at the base. So your work really advocates for collapsing that hierarchy. And Aubrey, from your perspective at the Laramie Plains Civic Center, particularly, and leading up to your big weekend with Fringe Fest, give a little plug for that.
Thank
Um,
you.
Also, as an individual artist, why is it so essential for us to move away from this hierarchy, I can never say that word, hierarchical thinking? And how does the hierarchy actually harm our creative communities?
Well, when you have a hierarchy, it breeds competition. When you have a lot of artists that are trying to get into a few galleries, and those artists that are in galleries are trying to get into museums, and ultimately funders are choosing what kind of art is going to be put in which spaces, it breeds a lot of competition. And instead of collaborating, it starts draining the energy from the artists or from galleries or other like other opportunities for people to be cross-pollinating and growing ideas. It drains their energy because they perceive the resources as limited, and they are less interested in collaborating and sharing those resources and more interested in making sure that they're getting what they can get. It reinforces harmful power dynamics where you're favoring those that already have existing capital access, and it starts marginalizing grassroots groups or non-traditional artists. If you're different, you're not going to be getting into like the old boys club, essentially. And it starts to and that starts to damage the collective well-being of the creatives, of the artists, or anyone in the system. Even somebody who is a funder, they start to feel like, oh, people only are interested in me because of my money, and their own humanity is getting limited as well. So feelings of we're not good enough, we have no power, or you can't trust that a gallery cares about you as an artist, they care what they can make on you. It breaks down that trust and that general sense of community and belonging. And artists get stuck in limited imagination spaces. They're not allowed to explore that new idea or develop a new process or try anything new because this is what sells and this is how I pay my bills. So they're not going to try anything else. So it starts limiting their imagination as well.
I think that's a really vital perspective. So, if you take this hierarchy and you look at it from the perspective of an artist or a small arts organization, or even just a community leader who is looking for change and wants to start to break out of those silos, one of the first steps is making that initial outreach, which can be out of our comfort zones. So, Ishmael, from your perspective, and your vantage point somewhat with the Arts Council, and particularly with the Laramie Public Art Coalition, what are some practical ways that individuals can reach out and begin forming these meaningful relationships and connections across different roles?
Yeah, so I think, this was something that I learned in art school and has stuck with me is just like being in the room, being at the events, even, becoming a familiar face means that those people will start to recognize you. If they're other artists or if they're gallerists or curators or funders, just being in the room as often as you can. We all have our own lives and our own capacities, but being able to squeeze it in when you're able to, I think really starts to build that you're invested in the community and that you're interested in these specific outcomes. And I think once you start becoming familiar with the different players and becoming aware of what each might be able to offer, then you approach with curiosity and shared goals rather than something that's merely transactional. I think a lot of gallerists get proposals from people who have never been in their galleries. And I think, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. And I think for me at least, if I'm able to visit a gallery as an individual artist, I absolutely do. Even if I have, maybe the smallest inkling of what I would do in a space like that. But I think it's reaching out with curiousness, curiosity, and saying, you're working on a level that I understand and I appreciate, and I also want to contribute to that. So maybe it's inviting the gallerist for a coffee and just talking about both of your practices. So starting the conversation, genuinely interested in them and their position rather than immediately starting with a want or an ask. I think also with that, you start to recognize that the unique energy in each role. So individual artists can bring innovation and storytelling. Community organizations can bring local trust, capital, and accessibility, whereas state agencies and funders can bring even more capital and access to those broader networks. So I think in my position where I wear a lot of hats, as an individual artist, as someone who's the chair of a nonprofit arts organization, as well as someone who's also in state government with the Wyoming Arts Council, I can see how these things can start to come together. And I think starting with those informal conversations and attending local gatherings and being able to just have conversations about those local needs. So, be bold, be genuine, and reach out to people. I mean, I love getting random emails in my inbox that are like, "Oh, I saw this thing. Could you tell me more about it?" Or "I have this idea. Can we talk about it? What are your thoughts on it?" So being able to just start that open-ended conversation rather than coming in immediately with a plan, with an ask, knowing what you want the outlook to be.
I think that building those connections is a really important starting point. But then once you've made the connection, established the relationship, then it's almost that's when the real work starts, where you have to nurture the relationship and sustain that relationship and partnership over time. So this next question is geared towards both of you. Aubrey, maybe you'll answer first. How do we sustain these relationships after you've gotten your first, your first grant or exhibition or project? You overcome that big hurdle, you feel like you're successful, and then how do you continue breaking down the hierarchy and nurturing those relationships?
Yeah, I think that oftentimes we want to show up as our best selves in every opportunity, and sometimes, we're human and we do have limits to our time, our resources. Maybe somebody needs something from you that you can't offer. And so, one of the best things you can do when you are taking care of that relationship, outside of just a grant cycle or a project or a program, is being really clear with yourself and with others about what commitments you have and what resources you have and what you don't. Brene Brown has this saying that um, kindness and niceness are different things. Oh, I'm gonna butcher it. I'm so sorry. But essentially, being honest is being kind. Sometimes saying no or saying, "Hey, I'm at capacity right now. I would love to, but I can't." Um, so being really clear about your communication and where you're at, and then honoring the commitments that you do make. Showing up when you say you're going to, so that that can build that trust. Whether you say, "Oh yeah, I'll show up to that opening," and then, maybe you don't make it. So you reach out and say, "Hey, I had something come up. I'm so sad to miss you." Like just following up and being really clear in your communication, and also just having shared stewardship. It's not, if a project happens, it's not just your project or just their project. You're now in stewardship together. And so seeing that collaboration as existing in on a continuum of we've now done something together, and we're gonna, when we talk about it, we're always gonna honor the other person who helped us make that happen. Um, and I also think that something outside of just communication is making sure that there's a mutual benefit. When one party is kind of gaining and another party is losing, that doesn't help us take care of the system in the long term. So making sure that there is a mutual benefit. Arts organizations and venues can get really vibrant, authentic community engagement and creative programming, and artists can gain access to the facilities that they need. They can gain compensation for their labor. Administrators can, build trust in working with different individuals and organizations. And with that trust, they can continue to have a broader reach. So I think, to kind of bring it all back, it looks like continuing to touch base in little ways, a text, an Instagram post, an email reach out, hey, I heard blah, blah, blah. Continuing to have those points of contact and being really honest with each other and accepting that human element is a huge part of making sure those relationships stay healthy over a longer period of time.
Thank you. Ishmael, I really like the idea about kind of, and Aubrey touched on it, circulation of resources amongst organizations. If I break it down simply thinking about it, maybe there's an art fair and I don't want to buy a tent. There are really simple ways that we can share resources, and funding isn't always um, just a one-way trip. And maybe you can expand on the circulation and talk more about mutual benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think um, from older models of the art world, we see that like, the galleries and the curators and the museums are kind of taking this up and it's their thing and they're upholding an artist. Um, and we see from that a change in culture where it is no longer just like an artist who's being upheld, but rather an artist and their community. I think we're seeing a lot of that as the term artist and community organizer merge closer. I think that's something that Aubrey and I both practice in our individual practices and all of the hats that we wear. So I think it's learning that um, all ships rise in a tide. Like we can bring everyone up in a much easier way. So grant investments and state support end up trickling down to strengthen local economies and community wellness. So maybe funding is only going to this one organization, but from there they can provide all of these services. Some of that maybe is funding artists to do a workshop, funding performances, funding or providing an open space for art making. Um, and I think that a lot of it has changed in how we see things because it's no longer, especially I think between Wyoming nonprofits, it's no longer this is mine. I'm not going to let you know about it, or I'm going to keep it behind this kind of wall or something. I think Wyoming, in general, is just a very scrappy group of people. So I think our nonprofits are just the same. So being able to have an organization that shares its resources or an artist that sees an opportunity and passes it along to someone else, just saying, I don't have the capacity for this, but I think this would be right up your alley. Or being invited into an exhibition and saying, I love this. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Have you also seen this other artist's work that falls in line with the theme of this show? Um, and on that, I think it's also those feedback loops. So, kind of what Aubrey was saying. So, having a continuous dialogue between funders and artists and art administrators and funders, and this circle that we've created, um, ensures that programs remain accessible to people and responsive to real world conditions. I think being wearing all of these hats gives me the opportunity to see things through an artist perspective. If I'm at my arts administration job, or if I'm an artist, I can see things from an art administrator's lens and being able to understand that things are changing. And especially in Wyoming, I think the arts scene is changing after the past year and some change, and being really supportive of each other.
I think that support, I've recognized that too, having worked in the arts in Wyoming. And I love your definition of us being scrappy. I think that's so true because we're so spread far in between, and our resources can be very limited at times. And it just breeds the Wyoming resilience that we have. So, we've talked about the pieces, and now I wondered if you wouldn't mind giving us a quick roadmap of how they all fit together. That way we can understand the primary roles, the resources, strengths, and maybe the responsibilities of each sector that you've defined in your booklet that you put together.
Absolutely. Let's see. Aubrey, can you see that?
I can, yeah.
Perfect. I'll let you start.
Okay. So our first role, which I don't actually know who's here, so it's going to be interesting to see how you all feel about these different roles. But individual artists and collectives. The primary role of these individuals is creative generation and innovation. So there's your role, your resources, what you have access to, which all of us have something, and then your responsibility. So the responsibility of an individual artist would be, or your resources, excuse me, are your skills, your ideas, your unique perspective, your network. Who do you know? What other artists are you in community with? And creative problem solving. Artists are amazing at this. Responsibilities that an individual artist would be holding on to or carrying for the community would be cultural expression, storytelling, risk taking. It's your responsibility to step into a space that maybe you are a little uncomfortable with, and honoring the commitments you do take on. So those are our responsibilities for individual artists.
Next, we have community arts organizations. So their primary role is to connect people and make creativity accessible. Resources and strength vary widely depending on the organization, but a lot of it can be based in community trust, access to volunteers and people who really care about the mission. Local spaces, I think of the Laramie Plains Civic Center, I would say, is a great example of this. They have access to so many different types of spaces and they offer that to the community. Um, they also have often a roster of teaching artists or neighborhood partnerships that they're already in contact with. So it's not a reaching out, starting anew, but rather just tapping into an existing relationship. Responsibilities can often include access to the facility, to anything that's offered, participation, inclusion in the events, being open and accessible to everyone, community wellness, representation, and then they can also act as a trickle down for funds, kind of like I mentioned earlier. Maybe the organization is getting the bulk of the funding, but then they can parse it out further throughout their different programs, offerings, facilities, etc.
Our next one is nonprofits and cultural institutions. So these are similar to arts organizations. The Civic Center is a little bit of both. But nonprofits and cultural institutions, their primary role is to preserve, present, and sustain the art infrastructure. So having a collection of physical art, or preserving a tradition. So one sort of like an artist market that happens every year, making sure that that is being taken care of and pushed forward. So they're thinking about 10, 20 years down the line, how are we going to be preserving our arts culture? And then the resources that they typically have access to is organizational trust. So between other arts organizations and funders, they have trust with those entities so that they can be, yeah, here's grant funding for that. You've always done well, so we're going to trust you to continue doing that. They also have staff capacity, facilities, funding systems, cultural archives. So they have a collection of things from not right now that we can pull on and learn from today and to take care of for the future. And long-term planning, like I mentioned earlier. Their responsibilities are stewardship, education, accessibility, making sure everyone can access the arts, and equity and long-term sustainability. So these are sort of they're like the little time capsules of our culture.
Galleries and art centers. The primary role is to showcase and distribute creative work in whatever media that ends up being. Resources and strengths that those spaces can offer are exhibition areas, marketing reach. So being a well-established gallery is much easier to get word out, even get ads in papers and stuff like that, rather than an individual artist. They also offer collector networks. You can talk with the curators for their expertise and how they pull a show together, as well as being able to help form creative connections between artists who are working in similar areas or people who are trying to do similar things. And their responsibilities are often artist representation, public engagement, fair sales practices, if selling is part of their conversation, as well as visibility. So being able to not only put the artists on a pedestal and being able to showcase their work, but also showcase themselves as a trustworthy entity in the community.
And then we have educational institutions. So in Laramie and also within the state, this looks like your schools, your colleges, as well as like artist workshops. So as an educational institution, the role is to teach, to research, and to cultivate future artists and audiences. And their resources and strengths are facilities. Have you been to the University of Wyoming's studios and gallery space? It's amazing. They have great facilities. They have great faculty and students. And there's educational institutions should usually have some sort of mentorship component, helping one another grow. And they also offer access to theory as well as history. So, what have we been talking about, and how have things moved through history, and teaching people about what that has looked like and their responsibilities. Oh, I'm so sorry. My screen has gotten silly. Their responsibilities include knowledge sharing, so don't be a gatekeeper with your knowledge, skill building, researching, innovating on media, and community outreach.
And then one of our larger ones that we've kind of been talking about today. So funders, foundations, and government agencies. The primary role of those is to distribute and direct resources to support cultural health. So that can be in providing funds for exhibitions or performances or things even like operating funds, which is something anyone familiar with nonprofits is always the harder one to get people to buy into. So resources and strengths are grants, funding programs, artistic opportunities like fellowships, advocacy power, as well as policy influence. So being able to have those conversations at a larger level when we're thinking about legislation and things that are ongoing. And the responsibilities from there are equity, being able to be available for everyone in Wyoming of any type of artist, no matter what, or any type of organization that's a nonprofit working in the arts. Transparency and accountability, as well as investment in underrepresented voices, voices from around Wyoming. I think as all of us in the arts in Wyoming know, there is a specific lens through which Wyoming is often seen, but I think that doesn't allow the other facets of Wyoming and Wyomingites to shine, especially in our artistic worlds. So
Then you have businesses and creative industries. So you have businesses that may or may not be directly involved in the arts, and then you have creative industry where that is specifically tied to creation. So this is kind of, but they're both in sort of this free market space. So that's kind of how we're approaching these. Their primary role is to produce producing items to be consumed, to promote those items, and to collaborate with artists to bring creative products to public life. So if I'm trying to think of an example here. So if Coal Creek decided to have a new t-shirt line as part of their merch, they could engage with a printmaker to create that design and then to put that t-shirt out there for the community to purchase. So there's an example of a collaboration that could happen. And then their resources and strengths is they typically have capital. I can say words. Capital. They have access to production tools. They have access to audiences and marketing channels. This is what they do all the time. So when they're working with an artist, these are things that they're really good at bringing to the table. Then we have their responsibilities. They should be, if Coal Creek is collaborating with a printmaker, they should be compensating that printmaker appropriately. They should be creating ethical partnerships. They should be innovating in both their product and what they are presenting to the community. And they should offer visibility for creatives. If that printmaker designs a t-shirt, then when they say, hey, look, we have new merch, they should also be telling everyone, this is the artist that made that merch. Look, you can check out their other stuff here. That kind of equal partnership and making sure everyone is visible to the person who is engaging with that product.
And then we have venues, festivals, event producers, so all kind of in that performance realm, gathering realm. So the primary role is to gather people for a shared artistic experience. Resources and strengths in these places are access to public spaces, equipment access. That's something that I think a lot of artists can lean on, of saying, I don't have this specific speaker or mic set, but do you have access to one? And I think community can form around being able to provide that. They also have logistics expertise. So being able to say, to go from an idea of a festival to a finished product, everything is running the way that it's supposed to. Which, depending on your background, maybe as an artist, that isn't your strong suit, or that's not something you've ever had the capacity to be able to do. So this can also be a learning experience to kind of figure out those steps as you're giving, as someone who's more experienced is taking the main reins on that. We also have audience engagement. So again, being able to have a diverse set of audiences that are already engaged in the venue or the type of festival, or the event producer can often have specific audiences that are following them because of the events that they put on. And responsibilities during this are curation, so offering a very specific vision to the people who are attending. Inclusivity, safety is a very large one, celebration, fostering belonging, and marketing and promotion. So again, leaning on those kind of soft people, squishy based skills, and then those more secure, firm planning, marketing, and all of those kinds of things.
And then audiences and participants. These are a very important part of our ecosystem. And at any point, all of us have been an audience member or a participant in the arts, regardless of what role you might have outside of that. So, what is the role of an audience member or a participant? Well, you're there to witness. You're there to engage with what is being presented to you. You're there to complete the creative exchange. Somebody is creating something to be perceived. You are there to receive that, almost as a gift of sorts. Your resources. Your attention is a huge resource. It's also a limited one. Where you choose to put your energy is a resource that you offer as an audience member. And your feedback. What went well? What didn't go well? When somebody says, how did we do? Or leave your blah, 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 that is a resource that you have to offer, is your feedback. What did you think? How did you feel? Your cultural participation. You are engaging with culture. You are perpetuating it. Talking to somebody else about your experience. You are perpetuating the culture that is offered by that artistic practice. And financial support. Choosing to donate to a nonprofit. Choosing to leave a tip in the jar when a musician is performing. You have financial resources. They might be varying across, the gamut of humans. However, it is a resource that you have to offer. And then what are your responsibilities? Your responsibility as an audience member is to be curious, be open to, oh, what are they offering me? Advocating, saying, hey, the arts are really important. They offer diversity and wellness. So when you have the opportunity to advocate for an artist, an organization, do it. Use your voice. And then sustaining cultural value, which is just a really fancy way of saying being in the arts and engaging in that community throughout your lifetime and offering cultural value by being.
Thank you both so much. That sets a really clear foundation of the whole arts ecosystem. I think maybe from an outsider perspective, you would think that someone creates some art and then that art is on display for you to look at it, and that's what it entails. But there's so many more parts and ways that we can work together to kind of raise the organizations, the educators, the artists, all of us working towards the same goal, which is bringing more art to Wyoming. And I want to let participants know that you're welcome to drop questions into the chat, and Ishmael and Aubrey will be happy to answer those. Also, maybe in conclusion for today's webinar, I have two things. First, I'd like you for one final takeaway. If there's one action or mind shift that you want everyone, whether they're an artist, administrator, community advocate, to put into practice tomorrow, what would that be?
I think that the biggest thing that we could do right away, it doesn't cost much, is just shifting your perspective from I'm in competition to I'm in collaboration. Look at the nearby artists or organizations not as rivals for limited dollars, but as ecosystem partners that can strengthen your own creative soil. Um, I guess an actual takeaway, an action you can take is say, okay, I'm going to have coffee with somebody from my immediate circle. That can be a fellow artist, or if you are in an organization, it could be a coworker that you don't know super well. Grab a coffee with them, sit down and chat. So have coffee with somebody who's in your building or your organization, have one with somebody who's in your town, and then have some coffee with somebody who's in the state, who does not live in the same immediate community as you, but somebody who is nearby. Just try set yourself up for the next 3 months. Pick one coffee, one that's local, one that's semi-local, and one that's on a bigger level, and just see it as I want to connect with this person. I want to understand them a little bit better.
I think that is a great one. And I think being able to remember, again, shifting that mindset that every part of the ecosystem has an energy and a responsibility tied to it. So we all have different places within that. So similarly to Aubrey's action item, I would say reach out and start a conversation. Even if you're just going to a gallery, talk to the gallerist or talk to the curator if they're at hand. Start those conversations. And when you do, recognize, I'm like pointing up here because I want myself to also remember this, but also to emphasize, recognize the value that you yourself are bringing to the table, regardless of where you sit. I think artists and people in the arts administration and the arts world often see themselves as not being able to offer much, but I think that we all have a value and resources that we can offer to everyone. You know, maybe it's not an exhibition space, but maybe it's a connection, an email connection, or a specific type of media or anything like that. So recognize the value that you're able to bring to the table, no matter where you're sitting.
Thank you. Aubrey, since we have a little bit of extra time, do you want to tell our audience about the Fringe Fest that's happening this weekend in Laramie?
Yeah, it's I just on I have to give you my context as a squishy human going into this weekend. So today it's Friday. We have of course, this lovely chat that we get to have with everyone today. And then tonight at 5 o'clock, the gallery here at the Civic Center, the Gorgon Gallery, it's on the third floor, and we have an arts opening of a collection of art from several Laramie artists. We actually have a few Jackson artists that are showing. And there was another, I think a Cheyenne artist as well, that have all submitted work for this side quest show. So not your traditional medium or kind of an unfinished, I'm exploring this new thing. So we have this really wonderful array going on in our gallery right now. So that opening, or not that opening, the reception for that is this evening from 5 to 7. And then right after that, we have a play that is I almost need my like brochure. There's so much, you guys. There's so much. There's a play that is happening immediately after that. And so we have this arts festival. It's $25 for 3 days of art. There are plays, there are experimental performances. There's an ekphrastic which ekphrastic, I did not know this word. This was my vocab word of the month, is where a writer responds to art of like a visual art piece, and then that writing is going to be performed by an actor. That's one thing that's happening. And then there's lots of live music of all of the genres. There's some performing arts. So Oakley is performing Silence, which is this very, very powerful performance art piece where they are sitting in a chair and you're invited to sit across from them and make eye contact and just sit in silence. So there's just all of this weird stuff that you wouldn't think is happening in Wyoming. We're all cowboys, right? We ride horses to school. There's this amazing contemporary stuff that is all going to be happening this weekend. And you can come get your cute little wristbands, and it's $25, and you get to just connect with people from all over the state and see really wonderful, beautiful things. So, anyway, that's happening the next 3 days. And my squishy human self is also my son's birthday party is this weekend, and my wedding anniversary is this weekend. So we're just like packing it into 3 days.
Well, we're excited. The Wyoming Arts Alliance will be there throughout the weekend. Some of our board members, and I'll be there Saturday. I'm looking forward to it. I think that an event like this is a perfect example of an arts ecosystem working to lift and rise the arts in Wyoming. So, gosh, just thank you to both of you for sharing your expertise, for presenting, for creating this sort of really clear model and of a pretty transformative framework that I think we are all eager to start following. Thank you for all our attendees for joining us and remembering that we all have a role to play in this thriving arts ecosystem in Wyoming. And then be sure to join us next month for our next installment of our Wyoming Arts Alliance Online Arts and Culture series. We do this in partnership with the Wyoming Arts Council. Also, I guess I'll give a plug. The Wyoming Arts Alliance just finished our brand new website, which is up now. And if you guys want to check it out, it's still under our name, wyomingarts.org. We'd love you to stop by. WYA is a nonpartisan, nonprofit arts organization, and we're dedicated to arts advocacy and supporting arts and culture creators and organizations and educators across the state of Wyoming. So, any parting thoughts, Aubrey and Ishmael, before we close? I don't see any questions in the chat yet.
No, I think just a large thank you for the opportunity of being able to present this in a larger space.
Yeah, I'm glad to be in an ecosystem with you guys, whatever that looks like.
That's right. We have one going right here. So thank you so much. And with that, I think we'll close today's webinar. And
Right.
we'll see you guys this weekend.
All right, take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.